Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore the strangely complicated, and often quite useless, cures for insomnia in Victorian England. Imagine it's 2 in the morning. You can't sleep. You reach for your phone. The blue light searing your retinas as you scroll through, well, nothing. You just scroll. It's a modern misery. A special kind of self-inflicted digital torment. But trust me, as frustrating as that is, you almost certainly wouldn't have survived a sleepless night in the 1880s. The sheer, desperate strangeness they resorted to would make you beg for the comfort of a doom-scrolling session. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel find other people who enjoy falling asleep to quietly absurd historical facts. And feel free to leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. And what time it is. I love seeing this little community of night owls and history buffs stretching across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the cold. It's not a dramatic, biting cold, but a deep, seeping dampness that seems to radiate from the very bones of the house. You lie perfectly still in the center of a large, imposing bed, the kind with a dark wood headboard carved with unsettlingly plump cherubs. You can feel a faint but persistent draft on the back of your neck. A cold finger tracing the line of your spine. It's coming from the window, of course. The heavy velvet curtains, thick as a theater backdrop, do their best to fight it. But the Victorian sash window is an imperfect technology. It lets in a thin, whining whistle of wind, a constant reminder of the gaslit cobblestone street somewhere below. You are cocooned in a mountain of bedding. There's a linen sheet, cool and slightly stiff against your skin, followed by a series of heavy wool blankets, and topped with a thick, lumpy quilt. It feels less like a modern weighted blanket, designed for gentle, calming pressure, and more like you're being held down by a very large, very sleepy sheep. Every tiny movement is a major expedition, a rustling, heaving effort that disturbs the precarious pocket of warmth you spent the last hour cultivating. You try shifting your weight, seeking a new, undiscovered patch of comfort on the mattress. It's no use. The mattress, stuffed with horsehair, has its own ideas. It has compacted over the years into a landscape of hills and valleys. And you are currently wedged in a particularly unforgiving gully. The silence is the next thing you notice. It's a profound, enveloping silence, deeper than putting your phone on airplane mode. There is no distant hum of a refrigerator. No electronic whir of a standby light. The silence is so complete that it makes every tiny sound an event. The slow, rhythmic tock, tock, tock of the mantel clock in the corner isn't just background noise, it's the conductor of your sleepless orchestra. It feels like the original, analog form of doomscrolling, each tick another moment of wakefulness you can't get back. You can hear the house settling. The groan of an old floorboard in the hall. A floorboard that has groaned in exactly the same way every night for 50 years. You can hear the faint, far-off clatter of a horse's hooves on stone, perhaps the night watchman on his rounds. A lonely, echoing sound that only emphasizes your own isolation. This is the time of night when the mind, unburdened by the day's tasks, begins to wander into its own strange territories. You find yourself replaying a conversation from yesterday afternoon, dissecting every word, cringing at a slightly awkward pleasantry you offered to the vicar. Did he notice? Of course he noticed. You then begin to worry about tomorrow. You have to oversee the delivery of coal. What if the delivery man tries to short you a few lumps? You've heard stories. It requires a formidable and alert mind to manage a household. And here you are, listless and awake, your brain feeling like a bowl of lukewarm porridge. This quiet, anxious state might be familiar. But in your time, it had a different context. Many people, particularly in rural areas before the widespread adoption of bright, artificial lighting, experienced what was known as first sleep and second sleep. You would go to bed shortly after dusk, sleep for a few hours, and wake up for an hour or two around midnight. This wasn't considered insomnia, it was a normal period of quiet wakefulness. People would use this time to pray, to read by candlelight, to have a quiet chat with their spouse, or to simply lie and think. Then, you would drift off again for your second sleep, which lasted until dawn. Historians still debate just how widespread this biphasic sleep pattern was. or when exactly it vanished with the advent of a world that never truly got dark. But for you, living in a bustling city lit by the orange glow of gaslight, this pattern has been disrupted. The expectation is a single, solid block of sleep, and you are failing. You turn onto your other side. A maneuver that takes a solid 30 seconds of wriggling and blanket tugging. Now you face the wall. The moonlight finds a gap in the curtains and projects a pale, ghostly rectangle onto the flocked wallpaper. You trace the repeating pattern of faded roses with your eyes. 1 rose, 2 roses, a slightly deformed rose that looks more like a cabbage. 1 rose, 2 roses, cabbage. It's no use. The clock continues its relentless ticking. The draft continues its chilly exploration of your neck. The horsehair mattress continues its silent, lumpy judgment. You've tried the simple things. You've counted sheep until they formed an angry, unionized mob in your imagination. You have ensured the room is dark and, aside from the clock, quiet, but sleep remains a distant, incooperative stranger. And in this cold, quiet room, the frustrating thought begins to dawn on you. This is no longer a simple case of being unable to doze off. This is a condition, a malady, an ailment that might require intervention. Finally, with a soft groan that harmonizes with the floorboards, you give up. Lying here is a form of passive torture. Perhaps proactive torture will be more effective. You swing your legs out of the bed, a monumental effort that feels like the first stage of a polar expedition. The moment your bare feet touch the floorboards, a shocking, invasive cold shoots up your legs. It's a cold so pure and absolute it makes you gasp. You fumble on the bedside table for the matchbox. The first match snaps in your trembling fingers. The second one scratches, sputters, and catches, blooming into a tiny, precious flower of light. In its flickering glimmer, the room's shadows leap and dance, making the fat cherubs on the headboard look momentarily demonic. Holding the candle aloft, you shuffle out of the bedroom and into the cavernous dark of the upstairs landing. Your nightgown, a simple, long-sleeved cotton affair, offers about as much protection from the chill as a paper towel. The air here is even colder, heavy and still. Each step you take is accompanied by a loud, protesting creak from the floor, a sound that seems to echo through the sleeping house. You feel like a clumsy burglar in your own home. Down the main staircase you go, your shadow, thrown by the candlelight, stretching and shrinking against the wall, a tall, distorted phantom following your every move. You pass the grandfather clock in the hall. Its polished brass pendulum is a hypnotist's watch, swinging silently, indifferent to your plight. The kitchen is at the back of the house. It's a practical, joyless space, smelling faintly of coal smoke and boiled cabbage. Your destination is the colossal cast iron stove, a black, hulking beast that squats in the corner like a sleeping dragon. Getting it to produce heat would be an hour-long ordeal of kindling and coal. But you only need a small flame. You find the gas ring, a modern marvel, and with another fumbled match, you produce a gentle, hissing blue flame. From the larder, a small, cold room that smells of earth and cheese, you retrieve a jug of milk. This isn't the sterile, homogeneous liquid of the future. As you pour it into a small saucepan, you see a thick layer of cream slide in first, a fatty, yellow-white blob that will soon melt into the whole. It's aggressively farmed to table. As you stand there, stirring the milk with a long wooden spoon, watching the wisps of steam begin to rise, the anxieties of the night return with a vengeance. This is the source of the problem. You're sure of it. It's the sheer noise of modern life. Not just the audible noise, the rumble of the new railway line they're building 2 streets over. The clatter of carts and the cries of vendors that seem to start earlier every year, but the mental noise. The constant pressure. There's the fear of disease. A low-grade hum of terror that lives in the back of every city dweller's mind. Every cough from a stranger on the omnibus, every mention of a fever in the neighborhood, brings a fresh wave of quiet panic about typhoid or cholera. It's a lottery of invisible poisons. Then there are the social worries, which feel just as deadly. You think again of your conversation with the vicar. But this time you remember you accidentally used the wrong fork at luncheon last week. Did Mrs. Henderson notice? Her sharp, bird-like eyes miss nothing. The shame of it feels hot and prickly. A stark contrast to the cold room. Society is a game with 1,000 invisible rules. And a single misstep can send you tumbling down the ladder. It's like proofreading your own sent emails at 3 in the morning. But with much higher stakes and more complicated hats. Historians still debate the true psychological cost of the Victorian era's rigid social structures and rapid industrial change. Was there a tangible increase in what they called nervous disorders and melancholia? Direct results of a world that was growing faster and more complex than the human mind was prepared for? Or were people simply more inclined to document their anxieties? You pour the warm, steaming milk into a mug. The smell is rich and slightly sweet. You take a sip. It's comforting, a pocket of warmth sliding down into the cold pit of your stomach. You sit at the heavy wooden kitchen table, the candlelight making the familiar room strange and new. You drink the milk slowly, deliberately, trying to will its folksy magic to work. You are supposed to feel your eyelids grow heavy, your mind grow quiet, but nothing happens. You just feel more awake. You are now wide awake and holding a mug of milk in a cold kitchen in the middle of the night. The remedy, it seems, is a failure. It has done nothing but move your insomnia from the bedroom to the scullery. With a deep sigh of resignation, you rinse the mug, leaving it by the sink. You extinguish the gaslight, plunging the kitchen back into darkness. The only light is your small, sputtering candle once more. The journey back up the stairs feels longer and more desolate than the journey down. Each creaking step is an admission of defeat. The warm milk might have failed, but it has clarified one thing in your mind. This is not a problem for simple, homespun solutions. This is a fortress of wakefulness that will not be breached by dairy products. As you re-enter the bedroom, the sight of the bed, with its lumpy terrain and judgmental cherubs, fills you with a fresh wave of despair. It is not a place of rest. It is a battlefield, and you have just lost the first skirmish. The next morning, or rather, later that morning, you decide to take decisive action. Your failure with the warm milk has convinced you that the problem lies not with your mind, but with your environment, specifically, the bed. You march back into the bedroom with the grim determination of a general surveying a failed fortification. The bed, in the gray morning light, looks even more culpable. It's a vast, lumpy continent of disappointment. You begin to dismantle it. The quilt comes off first. A heavy, unwieldy mass of patchwork fabric. Then the wool blankets, which you fold with angry, sharp creases. Finally, you are left with the sheets and the mattress itself. You pull back the linen sheet, and the true nature of your enemy is revealed. The mattress is a huge, fabric-encased bag, buttoned down at regular intervals like a Chesterfield sofa. This isn't a single, cohesive object. It is a container, and its contents are the problem. You press your hand against it. The surface is uneven, a landscape of subtle peaks and troughs. You know, with the certainty of long experience, that it is stuffed with horsehair. For much of the 19th century, a horsehair mattress was a sign of middle-class respectability. It was a step up from the truly ancient options. Like a simple straw-stuffed palliasse that would be used by the poor, little more than a sack filled with rustling, insect-friendly straw that had to be emptied and refilled regularly. A horsehair mattress was durable, firm, and breathable. In theory. In practice, the hair would clump and compress over time, forming hard, unyielding lumps that seemed to reposition themselves every night just to spite you. Maintaining such a mattress was a serious chore. Periodically, it had to be taken outside, beaten senseless like a dusty rug, and its insides teased, a process where the compacted hair was pulled apart by hand to restore its loft. It was a dusty, exhausting job, and one you suspect the maid has been skipping. You also know that this isn't the only option. The truly wealthy slept on clouds of feathers. Goose-down mattresses were the pinnacle of luxury, incredibly soft, warm, and ruinously expensive. They came with their own set of problems, of course. They had a tendency to swallow you whole, making it feel like you were slowly sinking into a warm, fluffy swamp. They were also hot, retaining body heat to a sometimes stifling degree. And some people claimed they gave off a faint, gamey odor, a constant reminder that you were sleeping on a pile of plucked waterfowl. A truly high-end Victorian bed might have a layered system, a firm horsehair base topped with a softer, feather-filled topper. It was the original hybrid mattress, a century before memory foam. But then there were the strange, forgotten innovations. You once read a magazine article about the rise of metal beds. The new iron bedstead was marketed not just for its austere, modern look, but for its hygiene. Unlike the ornate wooden headboards with their endless crevices and carvings, an iron frame offered nowhere for bedbugs to hide, a genuine, pervasive fear for Victorians of all classes. Remember the ancient Egyptian solution for pests? That strange concoction of ingredients that probably worked more as a repellent through sheer smell? This was the Industrial Age's answer. Alongside these new frames came new mattresses. One popular, if less than luxurious, invention was the chain-link spring mattress. It was essentially a hammock made of metal, a web of interconnected springs that promised uniform support. It was also, by all accounts, incredibly noisy, squeaking and groaning with every breath. A particularly strange and short-lived development was the seaweed mattress. Promoters in coastal towns claimed that mattresses stuffed with dried seaweed, or Zostera marina, were not only cheap and springy but also had therapeutic properties. They were said to repel insects and offer a naturally hygienic, iodine-rich sleeping surface that could ward off respiratory ailments. Historians are still unsure if this was a genuine folk belief or just a clever marketing ploy by entrepreneurs with access to a lot of free seaweed. It's a wonderfully bizarre image, a respectable Londoner ordering a mattress that smells faintly of low tide. All in the desperate pursuit of a good night's rest. Staring at your lumpy horsehair nemesis, you feel a surge of resentment. You are a modern person, living in an age of steam and steel. Why should your sleep be held hostage by a bag of animal clippings? The technology for a better night exists, but it is locked away behind a wall of expense and tradition. You can't simply order a new mattress online with next-day delivery. It would involve a trip to a specialized furnisher, a negotiation, a long wait, and a significant outlay of cash. The whole process is exhausting to even contemplate. You give the mattress one last, frustrated shove. It doesn't budge. It just sits there, a smug, lumpy testament to the era's stubbornness. The problem, you realize, is deeper than just the stuffing. The entire culture of sleep feels heavy, overbuilt, and resistant to change. The bed is not just a piece of furniture, it's a statement of status. A heavy, immovable anchor in the center of the room and, tonight, in the center of your anxieties. You pull the sheets back over it, smoothing them with a sigh. You have lost the battle with the mattress for today. But the war is far from over. Defeated by both milk and horsehair, you know it's time to escalate. It is time to call in a professional. It is time to see the doctor. The doctor's visit is a formal, almost theatrical event. You don't just pop down to a clinic. You send a note with your housemaid. And several hours later, Dr. Abernathy arrives at your front door, carrying a worn leather bag that smells of antiseptic and old paper. He is a man in his late 50s, with a grand waistcoat stretched taut over a prosperous belly, and mutton chop whiskers so magnificent they seem to enter the room a full second before the rest of him. He exudes an aura of solemn, unshakable authority. He is a man of science. He doesn't rush. He greets you in the drawing room, makes polite inquiries about your family, and accepts a cup of tea. The medical consultation is woven into the fabric of a social call. Finally, after the appropriate pleasantries have been observed, he gets down to business. Now, he says, setting his teacup down with a decisive click, tell me about this sleeplessness. You describe your nights of tossing and turning, the cold drafts, the lumpy mattress, the oppressive silence punctuated by the ticking clock. You speak of your anxieties, the feeling of your mind racing. Dr. Abernathy listens intently, nodding slowly, his expression one of profound gravity. He is not just listening to your symptoms, he is absorbing the entire narrative of your suffering. Then, he begins his examination, but it's not the kind of examination you might expect. He doesn't take your blood pressure with an inflatable cuff or listen to your heart with a modern stethoscope. The binaural stethoscope, with two earpieces, was invented in the 1850s, but many older, more traditional doctors like Abernathy still preferred the old ways. He might press his ear directly to your back, a slightly awkward and intimate gesture, or use a monaural stethoscope, a simple wooden tube that looks more like a small telescope. He asks you to stick out your tongue, peering at it as if it were a rare geological specimen. He checks the color of your fingernails and the whites of your eyes. His diagnosis is delivered with the confidence of a man who has never been wrong. It is quite clear, he announces, steepling his fingers. Your humors are out of balance. This is the cornerstone of his medical understanding, a theory that dates back to the ancient Greeks. The idea is that the body contains 4 essential fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A healthy person has these 4 humors in perfect equilibrium. Illness, whether physical or mental, is the result of an imbalance, an excess or deficiency of one or more of these fluids. Your insomnia, he explains, is likely caused by an excess of black bile, the humor associated with melancholy, earth, and coldness. This explains your racing thoughts and your feeling of despondency in the dead of night. The other prevailing theory he touches upon is the miasma theory. This was a widely accepted scientific fact of the day, a very popular and compelling idea that diseases like cholera, chlamydia, or the Black Death were caused by a miasma, a noxious form of bad air. This invisible, foul-smelling vapor was believed to emanate from rotting organic matter, swamps, and unclean places. While you might not have a swamp in your drawing room, Dr. Abernathy might speculate that a subtle miasma from a nearby factory or a poorly maintained sewer could be seeping into your home, disrupting your nervous system and preventing restorative sleep. It's a fascinatingly wrong idea. A ghost story told by men in lab coats. Remember how ancient Roman architects were obsessed with sewer design and fresh water? The Victorians inherited that concern but added a thick layer of quasi-scientific dread on top of it. Furthermore, he continues, warming to his theme, the modern urban environment is a constant assault on the nerves. He speaks of the invisible energies and vibrations of the city, the rumble of trains, the clang of industry, the electric crackle of the new telegraph wires. He believes these forces overstimulate the delicate modern constitution, particularly that of a sensitive person like yourself. You are not just sleepless, you are a victim of progress. His diagnosis is a strange and wonderful blend of ancient philosophy, environmental paranoia, and a genuine, if misguided, concern for the pressures of a rapidly changing world. One of the more peculiar, lesser-known diagnostic tools of the era, which thankfully Dr. Abernathy does not employ, was uroscopy. For centuries, physicians had engaged in the elaborate practice of inspecting a patient's urine for clues to their health. They would check its color, clarity, smell, and even, in a practice that was thankfully dying out, its taste. Elaborate urine charts existed, with dozens of different shades of yellow, brown, and red, each corresponding to a different ailment. Historians still find these charts, which look like bizarre watercolor paint swatches, and marvel at the confidence with which doctors would diagnose complex conditions based on little more than a glance at a glass vial. Dr. Abernathy, however, is a man of action, not just theory. His diagnosis is complete. The cause has been identified, an excess of black bile, exacerbated by the nervous energies of the city and a potential miasma. Now, he must prescribe a cure. He reaches for his leather bag, and you feel a faint flicker of hope, mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation. The cure for unbalanced humors and bad air is unlikely to be a simple pill. You brace yourself. The good doctor is about to outline his plan to restore your equilibrium. A plan that will almost certainly be more complicated and unpleasant than the ailment itself. You just hope it doesn't involve leeches. At least, not yet. The first step, Dr. Abernathy declares, opening a small, brass-clasped notebook, is to regulate your diet. The stomach is the seat of the nerves. An agitated stomach leads to an agitated mind. This sounds reasonable enough. You imagine he'll recommend cutting back on tea or rich desserts. You are, as usual, far too optimistic. His prescribed diet is a masterpiece of counterintuitive and frankly unappetizing advice. Rooted in the humoral theory he just explained, you must avoid all foods that are cold and dry in nature, as these will only exacerbate the excess of black bile. He explains, scribbling furiously with a fountain pen. This means, most critically, no cheese. Your heart sinks. A nice piece of cheddar with a biscuit is one of life's simple pleasures. Cheese, he continues, looking up at you over his spectacles with an expression of intense gravity, is notoriously difficult to digest. It sits in the stomach, putrefies, and releases noxious vapors that travel to the brain, causing disturbing dreams and wakefulness. It is poison for the melancholic insomniac. The forbidden list grows. He bans all red meat, especially beef, which is considered too heating and agitating. Cured meats like ham and bacon are also out, too salty and drying. Pickles, spices, and most raw vegetables are forbidden for similar reasons. You are essentially being told to avoid anything with a strong or interesting flavor. He looks at you sternly. And absolutely no alcohol. A glass of wine or sherry might seem to induce sleepiness, but it is a false friend. It creates a plethoric state in the blood, leading to a restless, poor quality sleep and, often, a waking headache. So, what are you allowed to eat? Porridge, he says with satisfaction. A large bowl of thin, well-boiled porridge for breakfast. Perhaps with a little milk. But no sugar. Sugar is a stimulant. For luncheon, he suggests a small piece of boiled white fish, cod or haddock, or perhaps the breast of a chicken. Also boiled. This should be served with a side of mashed turnips or well-cooked cabbage. For dinner, he recommends another bowl of porridge. Or, for variety, some bread soaked in warm broth. We must give the digestive system a complete rest. He explains, think of it as a quiet, bland holiday for your insides. It sounds less like a holiday and more like a punishment. This dietary advice was incredibly common. Cookbooks from the period are filled with entire chapters dedicated to invalid cookery. And they are monuments to culinary blandness. Recipes for beef tea, mutton broth, arrowroot gruel, and jellies made from boiled calves' feet were staples. The prevailing wisdom was that a sick or nervously disposed person couldn't handle the rigors of normal digestion. Flavor was seen as a form of aggression, a challenge the weakened body could not meet. It's a stark contrast to the modern, feed a cold, wisdom or the focus on nutrient-dense foods for recovery. Here, the goal was to make food as passive and unobtrusive as possible. Almost as if you could absorb it without the effort of tasting it. One of the stranger and less remembered dietary fads from the era was the Salisbury steak diet. Dr. James Salisbury was a real American physician who believed that most ailments, including anxiety and sleeplessness, were caused by fermentation in the digestive system. His cure? To eat nothing but minced beef patties and hot water 3 times a day. He claimed that this simple, pre-digested food would cleanse the system. Patients were meant to consume several pounds of this ground beef daily. Historians still debate whether Dr. Salisbury was a brilliant pioneer of low-carb diets or a quack who just really liked hamburgers. In any case, it's a funny thought, a prim Victorian lady, sitting down to a plate of plain, unadorned ground beef, hoping it will cure her nerves. Dr. Abernathy snaps his notebook shut. Adhere to this regimen strictly for 1 week. He commands. No cheese, no spices, no joy, only bland, calming nourishment. He stands up, preparing to leave. You look at the prescription he's handed you. A list of forbidden pleasures. It feels less like a path to sleep and more like a path to deep culinary despair. The idea of facing a week of boiled fish and porridge fills you with a sense of dread that is, ironically, probably not very good for your nerves. You can already imagine yourself lying awake at night. Not from anxiety, but from the sheer, rumbling boredom of your own stomach. The memory of your lumpy horsehair mattress, which seemed so terrible this morning, now feels like a fond memory of a simpler time. At least the mattress wasn't actively trying to make you miserable. The doctor has taken your vague, formless anxiety and given it a very specific, gruel-flavored shape. And this is only step 1 of his master plan. You have a sinking feeling that it's all going to get much worse before it gets better. A few days into your prescribed diet of relentless blandness, you feel bland, your body feels sluggish, your mind feels gray, and you are definitely still not sleeping. If anything, the sheer monotony of your meals has given you a new and very specific thing to lie awake and resent. You are haunted by the ghosts of meals past, a juicy steak, a sharp piece of Stilton, a slice of spicy seed cake. The boiled fish and porridge cure is a miserable failure. When you report this to Dr. Abernathy during his follow-up visit, he nods sagely, utterly unsurprised. Diet alone is often insufficient for the truly stubborn case. He proclaims, stroking his magnificent whiskers, the body has grown stagnant. The humors, though no longer agitated by improper foods, have become sluggish. They must be stirred. What you need, my dear patient, is vigorous exercise. Again, this sounds vaguely modern and reasonable. A bit of fresh air. A brisk walk to get the blood pumping before bed. You picture a pleasant stroll through one of London's royal parks, watching the lamplighter at dusk. You are, once more, adorably naive. The Victorian concept of vigorous exercise, for a person of your station and condition, is a strange and highly specific beast. I prescribe a midnight walk, he announces, when the air is at its coolest and most rarefied. Free from the miasmas of the day's traffic. You must walk for no less than 1 hour. At a brisk, unwavering pace. No dawdling, no window shopping. The very idea is startling. A respectable person, let alone a woman, walking alone through the streets of London at midnight? The city after dark was a different world. While main thoroughfares were illuminated by the lonely, flickering glow of gas lamps, which cast long, dancing shadows and pools of eerie orange light, side streets and alleyways remained plunged in an intimidating, inky blackness. The air would be thick with the smell of coal smoke, damp earth, and the faint, ever-present scent of the river. It was the domain of night watchmen, stray cats, and characters of a less than savory reputation. To venture out into it was not a casual undertaking. It will invigorate the blood and tire the limbs, leaving you perfectly prepared for a deep and dreamless slumber. The doctor insists, brushing aside your unspoken safety concerns as mere nervous hesitation. Wear sturdy boots. That night, you find yourself bundled in a heavy wool coat and a bonnet. Stepping out into the cold, quiet street, the city is hushed, but not silent. You hear the distant rumble of a late-night carriage, the lonely cry of a cat, the low murmur of voices from a public house on the corner. A sliver of warm, noisy light spilling out onto the pavement. You set off at the prescribed, brisk pace, your footsteps echoing unnervingly on the flagstones. The walk is a sensory experience. The cold air is sharp in your lungs. The darkness is not uniform, it's a tapestry of deep shadows and murky light. You feel intensely visible under the gas lamps, and completely anonymous in the stretches of black between them. It feels less like therapy and more like an adventure you are not properly equipped for. This prescription was part of a broader, physical culture movement that was gaining traction. Proponents argued that the sedentary lifestyle of the middle and upper classes, all that time spent reading, writing letters, and doing needlepoint, was leading to a host of nervous ailments. Exercise was the antidote, a way to reconnect with a more primal, physically robust state of being. Of course, this being the Victorian era, they managed to make exercise as complicated and strange as possible. For men, this often meant gymnastics in purpose-built halls, wrestling, or the rising popularity of sports like rugby and rowing. For women, the options were more limited and genteel. Aside from walking, there was horseback riding, always side saddle, calisthenics involving small wooden dumbbells or wands, and the incredibly popular, if slightly hazardous, activity of roller skating at indoor rinks. One of the most peculiar and forgotten exercise fads was the chamber horse. This was not a real horse, but a bizarre piece of indoor exercise equipment. It looked like a large, leather-covered accordion with a seat on top, supported by a wooden frame. By bouncing up and down on the seat, you could simulate the motion of trotting on a horse, all within the privacy of your own drawing room. It was essentially a Victorian bouncy castle for one, marketed as a way to agitate the liver and promote healthy circulation without ever having to go outside. Historians looking at diagrams of these contraptions are often struck by how utterly absurd they look. Like a piece of furniture designed by a madman. Your own prescribed exercise is decidedly less private. You march through the deserted streets, past darkened shopfronts and silent, imposing townhouses. Every flicker of movement in a shadowy doorway makes you jump. The initial fear gives way to a strange sense of exhilaration, a feeling of transgression. You are out of place, a respectable insomniac on a bizarre medical errand. After an hour, as the clock on a distant church tower chimes 1, you return home. Your legs ache, your nose is red with cold, and you are, as promised, physically exhausted. You climb the stairs, peel off your heavy clothes, and fall into the lumpy, hateful bed, a flicker of genuine hope in your heart. This must have worked. The logic is undeniable. But as you lie there, your body buzzing with the after effects of the cold and the exertion. Your mind is more awake than ever. It is replaying every shadow, every strange noise, every fleeting glimpse of a face in a dimly lit window. The vigorous walk has failed. It has simply replaced your vague, internal anxieties with a fresh set of very specific, external ones. You have not tired out your mind. You have given it a whole new playground of spooky streets to run through. The failure of the midnight walk plunges you into a new level of despair. You have tried a bland diet. You have tried exhausting, slightly terrifying exercise. You are still awake, and now you're also hungry and have sore feet. Dr. Abernathy, however, is a man of unshakable conviction. When he learns of this latest setback, he doesn't question his methods. He simply concludes that a more powerful intervention is required. The nervous system is clearly overexcited and the humors remain stubbornly stagnant. He announces during his next visit, he looks at you as if you were a particularly challenging puzzle. We have tried to calm it with diet and stir it with exercise. Now, we must shock it into submission. We must turn to the water cure. A small, cold knot of dread forms in your stomach. You've heard whispers about the water cure, or hydropathy. It was an incredibly popular and fashionable treatment, especially among the well-to-do, grand, hotel-like establishments, known as hydropathic sanatoriums, had sprung up in scenic spa towns like Malvern and Matlock. People would flock to them to cure everything from gout to hysteria. The underlying theory, promoted by charismatic figures like Vincent Priesnitz and Captain R.T. Claridge, was that water, applied in various forms and at various temperatures, could purify the body, strengthen the constitution, and flush out disease. It sounded clean and natural. The reality was often anything but. I will not send you to a sanatorium just yet, Dr. Abernathy says, as if this is a great kindness. We can begin a modified treatment here at home. His instructions are chillingly specific. Each morning, upon waking, or, in your case, upon giving up on the notion of sleep, you must be wrapped in the wet pack. This involves being tightly swaddled, mummy style, in a linen sheet that has been soaked in ice-cold water and then wrung out. You are then to be covered in a mountain of dry blankets and left to lie perfectly still for at least an hour. The first time your maid, her face a mixture of pity and confusion, applies the wet pack, the shock is indescribable. The moment the cold, damp sheet touches your skin, your entire body convulses. It's a breathtaking, full-body gasp that sucks all the air from your lungs. The cold is not just on your skin, it feels like it's piercing you, sinking straight into your bones. The maid works quickly, wrapping you tightly, pinning your arms to your sides, until you are a helpless, shivering cocoon. Then come the blankets, piled on top, their weight immense and suffocating. The theory behind the wet pack was that the initial shock of the cold would draw blood away from the internal organs. Then, as your body fought to warm itself, blood would rush back to the surface, promoting vigorous circulation and inducing a cleansing sweat. You are supposed to reach a reaction stage, where you begin to feel a pleasant warmth spreading through your body. But for the first 20 minutes, all you feel is a miserable, teeth-chattering cold and the rising panic of being so tightly constrained. It's like being hugged by a very large, very cold squid. You lie there, listening to the squelch of the damp sheet with every tiny movement, feeling utterly ridiculous. Remember the strange seaweed mattress you once read about? This feels like its evil, more aggressive cousin. This was just one of the milder treatments. At the grand hydropathic establishments, the therapies were far more elaborate. There was the Neptune's girdle, a wet cloth wrapped around the waist and worn all day. There were ablutions, where a therapist would vigorously rub the patient's body with a cold, wet cloth. There were sitz baths, foot baths, and head baths. One of the most feared treatments was the douche, which had nothing to do with modern hygiene. It involved being blasted with a high-pressure jet of freezing cold water, sometimes from a considerable height, to stimulate a specific part of the body. The world of hydropathy was full of bizarre, forgotten contraptions. There were special bathtubs with attachments for directing jets of water, and elaborate vapor cabinets, where you would sit with just your head sticking out, being steamed like a vegetable. One particularly strange device was the plunge bath, a deep, often unheated pool that patients were expected to plunge into first thing in the morning. The goal was always the same: to jolt the system, to force a reaction from the body that would supposedly reset its natural balance. Historians still debate the efficacy of these treatments, while the cold water might have had some temporary effect on circulation. And the strict, regimented lifestyle of the sanatoriums probably did some good. The cures themselves were based on a complete misunderstanding of physiology. After an hour in your wet sheet prison, the maid returns to unwrap you. Your skin is red and blotchy, and you are sweating, just as the theory predicted. But you don't feel purified or invigorated. You just feel damp, exhausted, and profoundly demoralized. You have been systematically boiled, starved, exhausted, and now, flash frozen. The doctor's war on your insomnia has become a full-scale assault on your dignity. As you towel yourself dry with a rough linen towel, you can't help but wonder what Dr. Abernathy could possibly think of next. You feel a growing certainty that his ideas are going to move from the physically uncomfortable to the mentally bizarre. The battle has moved from the body to the mind, and you have a terrible feeling that things are about to get weird. Dr. Abernathy, it turns out, is a man of many theories. Having failed to starve, exercise, or shock your body into submission, he concludes that the root of your sleeplessness must lie deeper. The conscious mind is a fortress, he explains, peering at you as if trying to see through your skull. But the subconscious is a suggestible child. We must bypass the stubborn sentinel of your waking thoughts and speak directly to the part of you that wants to sleep. His solution? Mesmerism. A few evenings later, you find yourself sitting in a dimly lit drawing room, facing a man who is not a doctor, but a professor of mesmerism. He is not what you expected. You pictured someone wild-eyed and theatrical. But Professor Dubois is a small, neat man with immaculately groomed hands and a soft, reassuring voice. He speaks with a faint, unplaceable European accent that adds to his air of mystique. Dr. Abernathy sits in a corner, observing the proceedings with scientific detachment. Mesmerism, also known as animal magnetism, was a fascinating and controversial phenomenon. It was pioneered by Franz Mesmer in the 18th century, who believed that all living things possessed an invisible natural force or fluid, the animal magnetism, that could be manipulated to heal the sick. By the mid-19th century, it had become a popular form of alternative therapy and, more often, a form of public entertainment. Stage mesmerists would put volunteers into a trance and make them perform foolish or incredible acts. For serious practitioners like Professor Dubois, however, it was a powerful medical tool. "Please," Professor Dubois murmurs, his voice a low, soothing hum, "just relax. Gaze upon this." He holds up a small, glittering object, a crystal suspended on a silver chain. It catches the gaslight, sending fractured rainbows dancing across the room. "Breathe deeply. Let your eyelids grow heavy. You are feeling very calm, very serene." He begins to make slow, deliberate passes with his hands, starting at your head and moving down your arms, without ever touching you. It feels utterly absurd. You are acutely aware of Dr. Abernathy watching you, of the ticking clock on the mantelpiece, of the lingering scent of boiled cabbage from dinner. You try to suppress a giggle. Yet, you do as you're told. You stare at the crystal. You breathe deeply. You try to feel serene. Professor Dubois' monologue is a masterpiece of gentle, repetitive suggestion. Your mind is becoming quiet, like a still pond at dusk. The worries of the day are drifting away, like clouds across a summer sky. Your limbs are heavy, so very heavy. You cannot lift them even if you tried. Sleep is coming, a gentle wave washing over you. His voice is a relentless, monotonous drone, a human version of that fan you sometimes turn on for background noise. It's oddly compelling. Against your better judgment, you do feel a strange sense of lethargy creeping over you. Is it working? Or are you just so tired from all the other cures that you're finally crashing? This focus on the subconscious mind was a precursor to modern hypnotism and psychoanalysis. Thinkers of the era were becoming fascinated with the idea that our conscious selves were only a small part of the story. It was a radical departure from the purely physical explanations of humors and miasmas. This was the territory of the soul, the imagination. Historians still debate the true nature of the mesmeric trance. Was it a genuine altered state of consciousness? A form of self-hypnosis? Or simply the result of social pressure and the power of suggestion? For many, especially women who felt they had little control over their own lives, it might have been a socially acceptable way to cede control and find a temporary escape. Of course, mesmerism had its stranger, more occult fringes. There were claims that a skilled mesmerist could not only cure illness but also induce clairvoyance, allowing the subject to see distant places or predict the future. One lesser-known but fascinating application was mesmeric anesthesia. A handful of surgeons, most notably the Scottish Dr. James S. Dale working in India, performed hundreds of major surgeries, including amputations, using only a mesmeric trance to dull the patient's pain. This was before the widespread adoption of chloroform and ether. It's a baffling and slightly horrifying thought. A patient, wide awake but supposedly in a trance, undergoing surgery. The medical establishment largely dismissed these claims, but they represent a bizarre chapter in the history of pain management. Back in your drawing room, Professor Dubois' voice drones on. And now, you will sleep. Tonight, you will sleep deeply and peacefully. When you lie down in your bed, you will remember this feeling of calm. You will drift away easily, effortlessly, after what feels like an eternity. He claps his hands sharply. Awake, he commands. You blink. The room swims back into focus. You don't feel radically different, just a bit groggy and disoriented, as if waking from a boring nap. Professor Dubois smiles a small, knowing smile. The suggestion has been planted. He says, the seed of sleep is now in your mind. It will blossom tonight. You are skeptical. It all felt like a bit of parlor theater. Yet, as you prepare for bed later that night, you can't get the sound of his monotonous voice out of your head. You lie down on the lumpy mattress, and for a moment, you try to summon the image of the still pond at dusk. You breathe deeply. You wait for the wave of sleep to wash over you. The clock ticks. The draft whistles. The cherubs on the headboard seem to mock you in the moonlight. The seed of sleep, it appears, has fallen on barren ground. The fortress of your conscious mind, it seems, is not so easily bypassed after all. The failure of mesmerism marks a turning point in your quest for sleep. The respectable, if bizarre, methods of Dr. Abernathy and his professional associates have all failed. You have exhausted the official channels. Desperation, as it so often does, pushes you into the murky, unregulated world of commercial remedies. You decide to take matters into your own hands. Your journey takes you to a chemist's shop. It's a dark, narrow establishment, the air thick with 100 competing scents, bitter herbs, sweet floral oils, sharp chemical astringents. The walls are lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, crammed with glass bottles of every shape and size. They are filled with powders, tinctures, and viscous liquids in shades of amber, emerald, and ruby. The labels are a symphony of bold claims and elegant, curling fonts. This is the world of patent medicine, the Wild West of pharmaceuticals. You approach the counter tentatively. You don't ask for a specific chemical, that would be unseemly. Instead, you describe your ailment in vague terms to the chemist, a severe-looking man with ink stains on his cuffs. I am seeking a tonic, you say quietly, for a nervous disposition, something to promote restful repose. He nods knowingly, as if he hears this a dozen times a day. He turns to the shelves behind him, his fingers dancing over the rows of bottles. This was an era with virtually no regulation of medicine. A manufacturer could mix whatever they wanted in a bottle, give it a catchy name, claim it cured everything from baldness to consumption, and sell it to the public. The secret formulas were fiercely guarded, but the active ingredients were often cheap, powerful, and dangerously addictive. The chemist places a bottle on the polished wooden counter. It's made of dark green glass, and the label is a work of art. It reads, Dr. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, for children teething and for nervous afflictions in adults. The label features a calming image of a mother gently cradling a sleeping baby. It looks safe. It looks wholesome. It was, in fact, one of the most notorious and dangerous patent medicines of the age. Its key ingredients were alcohol and a massive, unlisted dose of morphine sulfate. It was incredibly effective at quieting crying babies and calming hysterical women, mostly by knocking them unconscious. It was also lethally addictive and responsible for the deaths of countless infants. You look at the bottle. Intrigued but wary. The chemist, sensing your hesitation, presents another option. Perhaps Madam would prefer something less domestic, he says, producing a smaller, more elegant bottle. Godfrey's cordial, a classic preparation, very reliable. Godfrey's cordial was another bestseller. A syrupy concoction that had been popular for over a century. Its recipe varied, but the core ingredients were almost always the same: opium, treacle, and a dash of sassafras for flavor. It was a cheap, accessible opiate, used by overwhelmed mothers and sleepless workers alike. These potions promised the world. Kimball's white pine and tar syrup, for coughs. Ayer's sarsaparilla, to purify the blood. Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound, for all manner of female complaints. The advertising for these products was relentless and brilliant. They used personal testimonials, dramatic, before and after, stories, and terrifying descriptions of the dangers of untreated conditions. They created a culture of self-medication, convincing people that they could, and should, treat their own ailments with a product bought over the counter. One of the most bizarre and illustrative examples of a patent medicine was Radithor. This product, sold in the 1920s, so a little after your time but born of the same unregulated spirit, was essentially radioactive water. It contained actual radium dissolved in distilled water. The manufacturer claimed it could cure impotence, fatigue, and over 150 other diseases by stimulating the endocrine glands. The man who marketed it, William J. A. Bailey, offered doctors a kickback for every dose they prescribed. A wealthy industrialist named Eben Byers became a famous user, drinking several bottles a day. He claimed it made him feel wonderful, right up until his jaw literally started to disintegrate from radiation poisoning. His horrific death led to some of the first real federal regulations of medicine. Historians see the story of Radithor as the gruesome, explosive finale of the patent medicine era. You stand in the chemist's shop, staring at the two bottles before you. Dr. Winslow's promises soothing comfort. Godfrey's cordial offers reliable, time-tested relief. You are unaware of the precise chemical breakdown of these mixtures. But you are not entirely naive. You know these tonics contain powerful ingredients. The very names, cordial, syrup, elixir, are cloaked in a gentle, almost magical language that obscures their true nature. They are not presented as harsh drugs, but as kindly helpers. You make your choice. You purchase the smaller, more discreet bottle of Godfrey's cordial. It feels less like a medical decision and more like a secret, slightly shameful indulgence. The chemist wraps it in brown paper, and you slip it into your handbag. As you step out of the dark, fragrant shop and back into the bright, noisy street, you feel a strange mix of hope and guilt. You have abandoned the flawed science of doctors and professors for the seductive promises of a label on a bottle. You are taking a gamble, and you have no way of knowing the stakes. Tonight, you will not be drinking warm milk or thinking of still ponds. You will be trying a remedy that comes with a small, printed guarantee of satisfaction, and a large, unwritten risk of ruin. Your foray into the world of patent medicine proves to be effective. A spoonful of Godfrey's cordial, with its sweet, treacly taste and underlying bitterness, does indeed bring a strange, heavy quiet to your mind. It doesn't feel like natural sleep. It's more like a thick, dreamless fog rolling in, muffling the sharp edges of your anxiety. You sink into the lumpy horsehair mattress not with resignation, but with a chemically induced indifference. But it's a fraught solution. The waking world feels distant and hazy the next day. And you know, with a prickle of unease, that this is not a sustainable path. You feel you need another opinion, a different kind of science, one that is less about the invisible fluids inside you and more about the visible architecture of your own head. This leads you to the office of a phrenologist. Phrenology was the ultimate, weird but popular, science of the 19th century. Its central idea, developed by German physician Franz Joseph Gall, was that the brain is the organ of the mind, and that it is composed of multiple, distinct, faculties like cautiousness, benevolence, destructiveness, or love of home. The theory held that the size of each faculty corresponded to a specific bump or indentation on the skull. Therefore, by carefully measuring and feeling a person's head, a skilled phrenologist could create a complete and accurate map of their personality, talents, and moral character. The phrenologist's office is less like a doctor's surgery and more like a scholar's study. Albeit a very strange one. The walls are lined with bookshelves. But instead of books, they hold rows and rows of plaster heads. There are busts of famous men, poets, generals, philosophers, and anonymous ones labeled with traits like idealist, criminal, or genius. Most prominent is a large, detailed chart of a head divided into dozens of small, numbered zones, like a butcher's diagram of a cow. This is the phrenological map, the key to understanding the human soul through the lumps on your scalp. The phrenologist himself is an enthusiast. He is a man with a wild shock of gray hair and an intense, burning passion for his subject. He greets you warmly and sits you down in a chair. "A fascinating case," he exclaims, before you've even finished describing your sleeplessness. The inability to achieve mental repose is a clear indicator of an imbalance in the cerebral organs. His examination is an unnervingly intimate experience. He begins by taking precise measurements of your skull with a set of cold, brass calipers. He murmurs numbers and notes to himself. Diameter from the eame to the glabella, circumference above the superciliary ridge. It feels like being fitted for a very strange, invisible hat. Then, he begins the reading. He closes his eyes in concentration and runs his fingertips over your scalp, pressing, probing, and exploring the landscape of your head with the focused touch of a blind man reading Braille. "Ah, yes," he mutters, his fingers lingering on a spot just above your ear. The organ of consciousness is remarkably well developed, very prominent indeed. This explains your tendency towards anxiety, your replaying of conversations and worries. He moves to the top of your head. But see here, veneration is also quite large. You have a deep respect for tradition and authority, which must make your failure to respond to your doctor's treatments all the more vexing. He continues his tour of your head. Secretiveness is moderately active. Self-esteem is healthy. Ah, and here is the problem. He taps a spot on your forehead. The organ of individuality, the faculty of observation and detail, is in a state of chronic overstimulation. It is working all night, noticing every draft, every tick of the clock, every lump in the mattress. It simply does not know how to rest. It's a strangely comforting diagnosis. Unlike Dr. Abernathy's vague, unbalanced humors, this feels concrete and specific. You are not morally failing at sleep. Your brain is simply configured for wakefulness. The phrenologist's proposed cure is, of course, based entirely on his diagnosis. You must actively work to suppress the overactive organs and stimulate the dormant ones. He advises, to calm individuality, you must practice mental dullness before bed. Do not read exciting novels. Think of vast, empty landscapes, a blank wall, a calm sea. He also recommends strengthening the opposing faculties. To bolster somnolence, the very will to sleep, we must encourage it. Perhaps a gentle, repetitive sound, like the buzzing of a bee. Phrenology was a global phenomenon. People would go for readings to get advice on everything from choosing a spouse to hiring an employee. Some companies would require prospective workers to submit a phrenological report. It was seen as a rational, scientific way to understand human nature. A neat system that could explain everything from genius to criminality. It's easy to dismiss it now as pure pseudoscience. But it had a lasting impact. The core idea that specific mental functions are localized to specific areas of the brain was a revolutionary concept that, in a very broad sense, laid the groundwork for modern neuroscience. Of course, the practice had its absurd side. One lesser-known application was phrenological matchmaking, where couples would have their heads read to see if their various bumps and hollows were compatible. A man with a large, amativeness, romantic love bump would be advised not to marry a woman in whom that organ was a veritable crater. Historians find these compatibility charts both hilarious and a bit poignant, a desperate attempt to apply scientific certainty to the messy, unpredictable business of love. You leave the phrenologist's office with a detailed, hand-drawn map of your own head and a list of mental exercises. The experience was far less frightening than the wet pack and far less morally ambiguous than the opium cordial. It was, in its own way, deeply affirming. You were not sick or broken, you were just you. As revealed by the very shape of your skull. That night, lying in bed, you diligently tried to picture a vast, Empty expanse of beige wallpaper while imagining the sound of a distant sleepy bee. The effort of trying to be so deliberately boring is, ironically, quite mentally taxing. The clock ticks. The organ of individuality is, it turns out, a stubborn and powerful beast, and it refuses to be silenced by imaginary bees or metaphysical wallpaper. Your journey through the strange landscape of Victorian cures has so far been a private one. A series of consultations and secret purchases. But your continued wakefulness is starting to become noticeable. You look tired during the day. You are perhaps a bit more irritable, a bit less engaged in conversation. And in a society where every action is observed and catalogued, your insomnia is no longer just a personal problem. It is becoming a social one. At a tea party one afternoon, a well-meaning but nosy acquaintance, Mrs. Gable, corners you by the ferns. "My dear," she says, her voice a conspiratorial whisper, "you look dreadfully peaky. Are you quite well?" Before you can offer a polite, evasive answer, she leans in closer. "Is it your nerves?" My cousin's wife suffered terribly from nerves. She found she simply couldn't sleep a wink. In this one exchange, the social stigma of sleeplessness becomes painfully clear. It isn't discussed as a simple medical issue, like a cough or a sore throat. It is framed as a problem of nerves, a vague but loaded term that hovers somewhere between a physical ailment and a moral failing. For a man, nerves might imply he was unstable, perhaps unfit for the pressures of business or public life. For a woman, the diagnosis was even more complex and damning. A woman's nerves were seen as an intrinsic part of her delicate nature. The ideal Victorian woman was supposed to be pious, pure, domestic, and submissive. She was the angel in the house, a calming, gentle influence on her husband and children. This ideal, of course, was an impossible standard to live up to. The reality of managing a household, navigating complex social rules, and living within a deeply patriarchal society was a source of immense stress. Nerves, hysteria, and insomnia were often the physical manifestations of this psychological burden, but instead of being seen as a logical consequence of a restrictive life, a woman's nervousness was often interpreted as a personal failure. It meant she was not serene enough, not pious enough, not fulfilling her domestic role with the proper placid grace. Sleeplessness, in this context, was a symptom of a disorderly mind, and a disorderly mind was a threat to the orderly household. It suggested a lack of self-control, a hint of the dreaded hysteria that doctors were so quick to diagnose in any woman who displayed strong emotions or unconventional behavior. Mrs. Gable continues her whispered consultation. "You must be careful," she warns, her eyes wide with concern. "A sleepless woman is, well, she is not at her best. It can lead to melancholia, to irrational thoughts." My cousin's wife became so overawed she started reading radical pamphlets. The horror in her voice is genuine. Insomnia is not just a health issue. It's a potential first step on the road to social and political deviancy. This view was reinforced by the medical literature of the day. Influential doctors like George Miller Beard, who popularized the term neurasthenia or nervous exhaustion, wrote extensively about the pressures of modern life causing a depletion of nerve force. While he acknowledged that men could suffer from it, he and others often focused on how it manifested in women, linking it to their reproductive systems and their supposedly more fragile constitutions. The cures prescribed were often designed to reinforce traditional gender roles. While a man might be told to go on a rugged camping trip, a woman suffering from the same symptoms was often prescribed the infamous rest cure. The rest cure, championed by physician S. Weir Mitchell, was a particularly insidious treatment. It was typically prescribed for women suffering from hysteria, anxiety, and, of course, insomnia. The patient would be confined to bed for 6 to 8 weeks. Forbidden from sitting up, sewing, reading, writing, or even feeding herself. She was to be completely isolated from friends and family, with only a nurse for company. The goal was to force the body and mind into a state of absolute passivity, rebuilding nerve force by eliminating all stimulation. It was, in effect, a prescription for a temporary living death, a complete infantilization of the patient. Historians now see the rest cure as a brutal tool for enforcing social conformity, effectively punishing women whose symptoms were a rebellion against their constrained lives. The famous feminist writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote her chilling short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, based on her own horrific experience with the rest cure. Remembering the phrenologist's diagnosis of your overactive individuality, you see a dark irony. Your very nature, the part of you that is observant and engaged with the world, is the part that society and medicine seem most determined to suppress. Your insomnia is being framed as a flaw in your femininity. You extract yourself from Mrs. Gable's clutches with a weak smile and a noncommittal murmur. But her words linger. Your private struggle has been publicly defined. And it has been defined as a failing. The pressure to sleep is no longer just for your own health and sanity. It is now a social obligation. You must get better to prove that you are not nervous, not hysterical, not a woman on the verge of reading radical pamphlets. This new layer of pressure, this fear of social judgment, settles on top of all your other anxieties. It is, you realize with a sinking heart, perhaps the least helpful sleep aid you have encountered yet. The social pressure to find a cure, combined with your own exhaustion, pushes you towards a path you had so far resisted. The Godfrey's cordial, with its opium haze, offered a temporary, foggy oblivion, but it felt sordid, a cheap trick. You crave something more refined, more medical. You return to Dr. Abernathy, not with a report of your failures, but with a new resolve. You describe your persistent wakefulness, the social anxieties, the sheer, bone-deep weariness of it all. You are no longer asking for a cure, you are pleading for relief. Dr. Abernathy listens, his expression a mixture of professional sympathy and frustration. He has thrown the full force of his Victorian medical arsenal at you: diet, exercise, hydrotherapy, mesmerism, and all have failed. He is left with his final, most powerful, and most dangerous weapon. He hesitates for a moment, then says, there is one preparation that seldom fails. It is potent, and must be used with the utmost care. But for cases as stubborn as yours, it is often the only recourse. He opens his worn leather bag and from a special compartment, he withdraws a small, dark blue bottle with a glass stopper. There is no fanciful name on the label, no picture of a sleeping baby. Just a single, stark word, written in precise pharmacist's script, laudanum. The name hangs in the air, both sinister and seductive. Laudanum was the superstar, the undisputed king of 19th-century medicine. It was an alcoholic tincture of opium, sometimes flavored with cinnamon or saffron, and it was prescribed for everything. It was used for pain relief, for coughs, for diarrhea, for nerves, and, most famously, for insomnia. It was seen not as a crude street drug, but as a respectable, powerful medication, used by everyone from working-class mothers to the great poets and thinkers of the age. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge was a famous addict. He claimed his visionary poem, Kubla Khan, came to him in a laudanum-induced dream. Thomas de Quincey wrote his sensational memoir, Confessions of an English Opium Eater, detailing his lifelong relationship with the drug. A few drops in a glass of water before bed. Dr. Abernathy instructs, his voice low and serious. No more than is necessary. It will quiet the mind and bring on a natural, restorative sleep. He explains that it works by soothing the nervous fibers. A vague but comforting explanation that avoids any messy discussion of addiction or brain chemistry. That night, you hold the small blue bottle in your hand. It feels heavy, significant. The memory of Godfrey's cordial is fresh in your mind. That was a blunt instrument. This feels like a surgeon's scalpel. You measure out a few drops into a glass of water, watching the clear liquid turn milky as the tincture dissolves. The smell is bitter and alcoholic, with a strange, faintly floral undertone. You drink it down. The effect is unlike anything else. It's not the foggy oblivion of the cordial. It's a gentle, quiet unwinding. The anxieties that have been a tight, cold knot in your chest for weeks begin to loosen their grip. The constant internal monologue, the replaying of worries, the planning and the fretting, it all just fades. It doesn't vanish, but its volume is turned down. From a frantic shout to a barely audible whisper. The lumpy mattress no longer feels like an instrument of torture, it is simply a place to lie down. The ticking of the clock is no longer a countdown to another sleepless dawn, it is a gentle, rhythmic lullaby. You feel a sense of profound peace. A warm, golden wave of well-being spreading from your core to the tips of your fingers and toes. It's a feeling of being perfectly, blissfully okay. You are not trying to fall asleep. You are simply lying in a state of perfect contentment. And sleep comes to you, not as a conquest, but as a welcome visitor. A soft blanket settling over your quieted mind. This was the great, terrible appeal of laudanum. It didn't just induce sleep, it induced a state of blissful tranquility. For people living in a world filled with genuine pain, disease, and rigid social pressures, laudanum was a miracle. It was cheap, legal, and readily available from any chemist. It offered a reliable escape hatch from the harsh realities of life. A lesser-known fact is how deeply it was integrated into daily life. People would carry it with them, taking a few drops to soothe a headache or calm their nerves before a difficult social engagement. It was, for many, the equivalent of taking an aspirin or having a calming cup of tea. Of course, the line between use and addiction was perilously thin and poorly understood. The concept of addiction as a medical disease was still in its infancy. Heavy, habitual use was often seen as a sign of a weak will or a dissolute character, particularly when it afflicted the poor. But for the middle and upper classes, especially women who were prescribed laudanum for female complaints, their dependence was often seen as an unfortunate but necessary part of their ongoing medical treatment. Historians are still entangling the complex web of class, gender, and medicine that defined the Victorian opium crisis, a quiet, domestic epidemic that unfolded behind the closed doors of respectable homes. As you drift off into the first truly peaceful sleep you've had in what feels like a lifetime, you are not thinking about addiction or social crises. You are thinking only of the silence, the blessed, beautiful silence in your own head. You have finally found a cure that works. And in the quiet, seductive whisper of the opium, you have no way of knowing that you may have just traded one problem for another, far more insidious one.